Good evening, everybody, to tonight's Audit Committee meeting. First, before we start, I've got a laptop with me this week, so I can see everybody who's not in the room with us and has joined us remote. So I'll say some special hellos. A big hello to some special guest stars, including Tony, Nicola from Deloitte, Karen from our accounts team, Steve, the Chief, Lee, Mark and John and Stuart from Deloitte. So welcome everybody to tonight's audit meeting. What we'll do is we'll approach the meeting in the normal way, where for members in the room we'll go to questioners in the order that their hands go up, and the same for members who have joined us remotely. If you can flag if you would like to speak as well, if I don't call you up. So without matter ado, we'll get started. Agenda item 1, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest at all? Councillor Burdes, if you could just touch your... Excellent. Excellent. And that's in the agenda item 6, isn't it? Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Burdes. Likewise, I would also like to declare a personal interest as a non-executive director of Blackpool Transport, covering agenda item 6 and the track maintenance programme. I can't see any other declarations, so we move on. Minutes of the last meeting held on the 30th of September. Do we take those to be a true and correct record? Yes, brilliant. Excellent stuff. Thank you. And on to Councillor Roberts. For those at home, Councillor Roberts is... microphone isn't working, so...
I'll shout loudly and hopefully...
Okay. Okay, brilliant. For those at home, Councillor Roberts was just declaring an interest in one of the items. We'll sort his microphone out whilst we carry on through the agenda. So on to agenda item 3. Audit. Sorry, my microphone just went there. Agenda item 3, audit follow-up, strategic leisure assets. And it's my great pleasure to bring welcome Lee to tonight's meeting. Lee, as this is your first visit to the audit committee, a special welcome to you. And the reason we invited you to come in is one of our roles as the audit committee is to pick up on any audit reports which have a high number of priority 2s in them. So those aren't necessarily ones that would be followed up by the audit team because they're not priority 1s. So it's a final check in place to see what progress is being made. And we're always very keen that the departmental manager or lead in those particular risks leads on that item. So if you could just take us through the report and the progress that's been made. The only problem we have is it's quite a big agenda tonight, so we only have about 20 minutes for this particular item. So don't take that personally at all. That's just a recognition of the time we've got. So if you could spend around 5 or 6 minutes on that, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Would you like me to give a brief overview of leisure assets to start with, Councillor Galley?
Please, if you could, Lee. Yeah, that would be great. Okay. Thank you.
So apologies for those who you may or may not know this information already, but I think it's important to put leisure assets into some context. So the leisure assets portfolio consists of Blackpool Tower, the Winter Gardens, Madame Tussauds, and what we call the Golden Mile, which is where the Golden Mile Arcade is, and several small units, independent traders. And they were purchased by Blackpool Council in 2010. And that was following a recognition by the council at that time that these key leisure assets were falling into a state of disrepair, really, following a number of decades of underinvestment and identified as the crown jewels in Blackpool's economy. and that decline needed to be arrested, and arrested quickly. So as I say, the assets were purchased in 2010, and that has been followed by what could be called an intense development of those assets. So shortly after acquisition, a world-class operator was appointed in the form of Merlin Entertainments for the Tower of Madame Tussauds. We also, shortly after that, created Blackpool Entertainment Company Limited to manage the Winter Gardens, following the previous management arrangement, which was Crown Entertainments. And during 2011 and 12, a significant amount of investment, both in terms of business investment and physical asset investment, was undertaken. And has continued really through up until the current day, and we have plans to go beyond the current period. So, for example, new attractions at the tower, for rebranding, a new roof on the Spanish Hall Winter Gardens, and regeneration of redevelopment of the circulation areas to the Winter Gardens, etc., etc. We could go on and on, but time is of the essence. So really, if there's any questions on any of that, if anyone wants any more information, it is a very, very quick potted history of where we are with leisure assets, and then Councillor Galley will probably move on to the recommendations within the audit report.
We can cover all the questions together, so that would make it easier for you.
Of course, yeah. So if we move on to the audit report then itself, as Councillor Galley says, there's a number of recommendations in the report itself. One of the tools that we utilise to manage the leisure assets portfolio is what we call a medium-term financial plan, and many of the recommendations centre around that and the development of that plan. So the first recommendation was priority 1. And it stated that medium-term financial projections should be reviewed and regularly updated as evidence emerges of recovery trends. But of course, as we all know, we've been through a very difficult period of 18 months or so, and the leisure assets portfolio is no different in terms of its struggle, like many other businesses last year. We can report that recommendation has been adhered to, and the medium-term financial plan is updated every couple of months, or as when new and what we would call material information comes to light. So if we have any significant cost increases, or we generate additional income over and above what we were previously expecting, that will be built into the medium-term financial plan. So that covers off recommendation 1, I think. Moving on to recommendation 2, the medium-term financial plan should be built on to assist long-term decision-making by incorporation of sensitivity analysis. And essentially what this does is it allows us to make adjustments as efficiently as possible to any of the cash flows within the medium-term financial plan. So we've taken on board the recommendation. We've built in the ability to change any cash flow within the plan on a percentage basis. So, for example, if we received new information that said, for example, we were going to generate 20% more income at the tower, we could build that in and see what the outcome of that was very, very quickly. Okay, so moving on to recommendation 3 then. Again, this relates to the medium-term financial plan and trying to enhance that as far as possible. This is a priority 2 recommendation, and the description is, or the recommendation is, to support the achievement of the medium-term financial plan. A medium-term strategic leisure assets business plan should be considered, including consideration of specific key performance indicators. So we do have a business plan in place. We are considering the most effective key performance indicators that we can implement. What I would say on that is all cash flows and inputs, if you will, or variables that form part of the financial outturn for leisure assets are considered on a monthly basis. So we look at everything in detail, be that income, any level of expenditure, from miscellaneous maintenance costs to the cost of running the tower illuminations, for example. And we measure debtors, we monitor them very closely, and we really do leave no stone unturned. So key performance indicators are, of course, important, but we do have some real good windows on the performance in terms of debtors, profitability, income levels. We monitor trends, etc., etc. So we're still looking at the key performance indicators, but they are under consideration. Okay, the next recommendation is number 4, again a priority 2. And the description of the recommendation is, when the financial impacts of the potential Golden Mile developments are known, these should be reflected in the medium-term financial plan. So we mentioned in the introduction to the leisure assets portfolio that we're continuing our intense development of that portfolio. The Golden Mile development is the next phase in that. You may or may not know that the executive approved the development of phase 1 of the Golden Mile recently, and there was a press release just a few weeks ago on that. I can report that the phase 1 element of the Golden Mile development is built into the medium-term financial plan, and those cash flows are reflected as per the recommendation. Okay, so that's recommendation 4. Moving on to recommendation 5. The strategic leisure assets risk register should be updated and developed to include the risk of failure to deliver the medium-term financial plan. We have updated the risk register. We are, as I say, we monitor the plan rigorously on a monthly basis, weekly in fact. But yes, we do recognise that the risk is there to failure to deliver, and it's been built into the risk register accordingly. Moving on to recommendation 6 then. This now moves away a little bit from the financial management and risk management of the portfolio. This is a priority 3 recommendation. And the description is, in liaison with the strategy, policy and research team, the possibility of measuring the effects now of the strategic leisure assets portfolio should be considered, including the impact of visitor performance. So this is a longer term sort of action, if you will. Some discussions have taken place with the manager of strategy, research and policy. And further consideration is being given to the use of visitor insights software application. For those of you who don't know about this, this is essentially a mobile data tracing app. It uses anonymized data and essentially allows you to track people who are in the town centre and may or may not visit the leisure assets portfolio. So essentially, it will give you a measure of penetration of those people who are in the town centre but are actually visiting the leisure assets portfolio. Of course, that would form part of a suite of measures that we've already talked about or touched on. So we constantly monitor visitor numbers for the Merlin run attractions. We're constantly looking at income levels. And of course, that gives very good insight into the performance of the leisure assets over a period of time. So that is underway. We will be having some more discussions with the policy manager on that, on implementing those measures for the mobile data tracking. But I think it will form part of a useful portfolio of measuring the success of the portfolio. And I think that covers all the recommendations, Councillor Galley.
Thank you for that, Lee. I appreciate that concise summary, and you did well in the time you had. Thank you. Right, questions time, team, rather. I'll do it the order of the hands that went up. So I think it was Councillor Burgess and then Councillor Critchley.
Thank you. I was interested to hear that report. and read it, obviously. Right through, you mentioned the MTFP, the Midterm Financial Plan. I think I could have really done with seeing that, because I have nothing. I feel like I have nothing to compare what's in this report with. So it just feels kind of nebulous. Is it possible for you to provide us with those kind of specifics? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Would you like me to respond, Chair?
I don't know if you can hear us. Yes, if you could, Lee.
Yes, yeah, of course we can share that information. Absolutely, we will make provision, and anybody who's interested to have a look at the detail of the medium-term financial plan, we can absolutely provide that. Yeah.
That's the point of audit, really. We are interested to see those specifics.
Of course.
It's and I feel that you know these answers, because you've right through your report you mentioned your KPIs and you're constantly monitoring, but I can't see any evidence of what you're constantly monitoring. It just seems very, I don't know, it just feels a little incomplete, that's all. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Burgess. I'll do it in the order the hands went up. So Councillor Critchley next.
Good evening. I just got a couple of questions. Yeah, I read the report. I thought it was really heavy, hard to read, to be quite honest. The language to me makes the report unclear of what you're trying to tell us about, if that makes any sense. There are no financial targets in there either, and I would have liked to have seen some. I know what you're saying about the assets they were when they were purchased and what they are now, but is there a follow-up of where they were then to where we are now? Because this doesn't show a journey. Does that make any sense? Like, don't show a journey from when we bought these assets to where we're up to now with them. And I know myself that everybody involved in these assets have made some tremendous inroads, but I'd like just to see that on paper, please. And my last one is, last two, sorry. What impact of the architectural restoration challenges, what have they been, and how have they impacted on achieving your targets? And then out of the recommendations in the report, which do you feel that might have helped you the most, considering that we've been through just quite a traumatic period, but what sort of would shine for you that we can take forward? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Brilliant, thank you. I noticed Steve's got his hand up as well. So, Steve, do you want to come in first, or do you want Lee to answer then yourselves?
No, if you don't mind, if I could just interject and perhaps make a suggestion that we have a separate workshop that's not in the public domain, because I'm just conscious that some of these figures are from commercial enterprises whereby we have profit share arrangements, and I'm sure these companies, Beckel, Merlin, wouldn't want their figures disclosed in the public domain. It's just my main concern. But we'd be happy to share that in a separate workshop or training session.
Okay. I guess the point, Steve, was really about the information. This, bearing in mind this is the first time this has come before the Audit Committee, and this has been a long journey to get to this point in terms of these assets were purchased in 2010, 2011. It's important for the Audit Committee, as you say, for us to recognise what the elements of risk are and how that's being managed. And we can have a private sit-in. There is nothing that stops us from doing that and having that conversation. But I wouldn't do it now because we would need to see those numbers. So what I would suggest is we perhaps bring that back to the Audit Committee at a future date and have that conversation at that point. Therefore, giving us an assurance as to that all the processes are being followed, what the trajectory is in terms of the plans, and that it's actually clearly understood by all as to what these assets actually look like, in terms of the figures that underpin them. So my instinct is, rather than have that conversation now in private, is bring it back at a different point in the audit agenda.
I've got my hand up, but maybe you can't see it.
Sorry, Chief. Sorry, apologies. Sorry, I was just watching Steve's reaction. Sorry, Chief.
Well, I suppose that's just what I was going to say is this item is on the agenda as a follow-up from an audit, not as an explanation about the successes or otherwise of the strategic leisure assets and how they're managed and how they're financed and everything else. So it's answering the questions that were and following up on the recommendations made by Tracy's team on an audit. So it may appear it's of its own partial answer, but it's only following up the recommendations from an audit. So it isn't the all-encompassing review of strategic leisure assets that maybe actually the members of the audit committee are thinking of and may be useful to them, because it's there for a purpose. So I don't know if Tracy might want to comment on that. So that's why it would appear to be a partial answer around the leisure assets, because it is only about the follow-up about the recommendation on the audit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief. I can see Jill's got a hand up as well. Jill?
Thank you, Chair. I think for me, when I was reading this report, I found it quite a difficult report to read, mainly because I think Lee has now given us that explanation about the assets, what they are, that brief summary. And I think if that had been included as a preamble to going into actually answering the question, as Chief Exec said then, this is a follow-up report. But I think we do need to have that sort of information that sets the scene. And it's not just for this report, Lee. I think just generally that would be very helpful, because these reports are produced for the benefit of the committee, and not only that, for the public who may be interested in these reports as well. So I think it's just being mindful of who the audience is, and that we don't necessarily know all that information. I think that would have helped sort of make this a bit more digestible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Councillor Hunter, you've been very patient.
Yes, I don't want to go over what's already been said, but I will just say this, that the report really addresses all the recommendations which arise from 16th of February, but it doesn't really tell you really exactly what's going on, which now that point's already been made, so I shan't repeat it. Steve did make reference to training. Well, you know, training for what? That's my question. Unless we've actually got more information in front of us, you know, there's not much point really in us exercising an audit function over this. 2 points. Key performance indicators have been mentioned. It would be useful, it's mentioned by Councillor Burdus, it would be useful if we get some sort of something to get our teeth into regarding the performance indicators, for future reference as an audit committee. And just finally, the company, Blackpool Entertainment, I've forgotten what its name is actually, the company, do they have an audit committee? Because I would expect that they would have, because I know in my time when I was on the Blackpool Housing Company board, they had an audit committee.
Right, I'll declare I'll declare a personal interest because I'm on that board and I also chair that committee as well. What we have to be very careful of, as Steve's point, is that these companies exist and they have their own structures and their own audit committees, and they report to their boards, and the boards in turn report to the shareholder committee and so on. What we're looking at though more is from the council's risk elements, and what we're trying to do tonight is to seek assurance around this area. Now, Lee has explained where he is with these particular risks, which is great, and you've done a good job with that, Lee, thank you. What I think the concern was partly what did this picture look like and how have we got to this point, and also what do we do with this item, because this is such a huge strategic area, what governance framework is in place for us to seek assurance moving forward. So what I think it might be worthwhile doing is bringing this item back, not as just a general item as an update, and we can have a conversation with Tracy about that in, say, 12 months, what that could look like in terms of allowing us to seek assurance around the whole framework of how we manage this element of risk to the council, bearing in mind we're thinking in terms of the wider strategy of the council around income, risk. So my thoughts are we bring it back around that area to discuss in, say, 12 months to make sure we can also square off some of these risks. I don't know if the committee would agree. That, Steve, should also allow us to have a conversation that doesn't allow us to focus on some of the commercial concerns of the companies, but just focus around how we manage the process and the strategic risk of the leisure assets themselves. I don't know what your thoughts would be on that, if that would help you as well.
The focus needs to be on the assurance framework, doesn't it? Yeah, the format of the medium-term financial plan, which Lee provides me with. I've got a version here dated October 2021, for instance. The KPIs, the governance framework that we have in place, not just the shareholder committee, but the informal relationship meetings that we have. Had some this week. The other informal meetings, I had a meeting with Carl Carrington today about roofs and ceilings. There's quite a number of these things ongoing, and perhaps if we can capture that in some sort of assurance document of what is actually going on to support this. And yeah, it is fast, as you would appreciate, with the various elements that Lee's indicated that contribute to this portfolio of strategic leisure assets.
Absolutely, brilliant. Thank you, Steve. That was really helpful. I think that's the direction we should go in. I've got two more questions, very briefly, if you could. So the order they went up, Councillor Burgess and Councillor Scott.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Steve. But I do go back to my original question about the midterm financial plan. If you have a copy of a version dated October 21, is it possible that we could get that? Thanks, Chair.
Steve, do you want to come back in on that?
I can share it with members of the Audit Committee in absolute confidence.
Thank you, Steve. Councillor Scott?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick one on the last page 21, R6, about the strategy and research policy, and with a view to using software to see who's using the facilities, who's not using the facilities. Looking forward on from that, has data, has it been, what would you propose to do with the data? Do you want to look at initiatives to get more people in the attractions? You know, no doubt there is at the moment different deals going on, but and do deals with the rail companies to get more people in?
Lee, do you want to come in on that, if you could briefly?
I will. Yeah. Thank you for the question. So what we would intend to do with that data is attempt to monitor the success of the measures that we're bringing into the leisure assets portfolio. So perhaps by way of example, we're about to implement a new attraction at the Madame Tussauds element of the portfolio, which is a family-friendly attraction, and we anticipate, and our projections inform us that should see an upturn in visitor numbers, and we would monitor that. And if we see things that are working as they should do and providing the benefit that those forecasts tell us they will provide, then we would look to implement similar measures across the portfolio. Conversely, if we implement measures that don't actually perform as well as we would anticipate or have been informed they will, then we know that we don't need to do that in the future. But it will be very much part of an ongoing monitoring suite, if you will, and we continually look at visitor numbers, as we said before, at turnover levels, etc., to see, you know, is the marketing that we're doing, is that working? Is it not working? Is it working better or worse than it has in previous periods? events like the fireworks, do they contribute to the success of the leisure assets portfolio? So, for example, would we run a fireworks display on a Friday night or a Saturday night? Which is the better mode, if you will, for generating visitors to the town and income for everybody who lives here?
Thanks, Lee. And finally, from myself, Lee, going back onto the other risks, one of the questions was, which of the recommendations helped you the most?
Well, to be fair, I think all the recommendations have been very useful. I think it's really important that we keep the medium-term financial plan as up to date and current as possible. So there's two really that are there, and that's the update, the regular update that we were doing anyway. So where we see material variations in any of the cash flows, we build those in. And that means that at any one glance, you can see what the portfolio is doing and how that will impact on the medium-term projections specifically. But also bringing in the Golden Mile development, phase 1 Golden Mile development, and the impact that has had on the portfolio, a positive impact based on the forecasts that we've got. So I would say that those two have been the more important of the recommendations, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lee. That was a good debut, may I say. Well done.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Look forward to seeing you in 12 months' time as we discuss some of the governance and so forth and processes. And I think we can have a lot of, I'm not sure if this is the right word for an audit, but a lot of fun with that, how we put that together. So,
yeah,
not
taking in the nature it's intended yet.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee. So you're free to go and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, and you. Goodbye.
Take care, Lee. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for that. On to agenda item 4, the risk register. Service failure. Now, this is going to be quite a big item, so we're going to have to be quite tight with our questioning and obviously our answers. We're going to break it down into the different risks, and then we're going to break it down further, especially when we get on to 2B and 2C, which is quite a fragmented risk register item in itself. So we'll go to 2A, which is the removal of children's services from the council's control, which is page 29. Now, Jill, Paula and Stuart, I believe you're going to lead on this, and then we'll, but before we do, I don't know, Vicky, if you want to just provide us with a very brief update, if you could.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Okay, so the social care improvement plan continues to make progress. And from the summer through to the autumn, there's been a range of key activities which really highlight that progress. So in July, we've had a Department for Education Stocktake review, which, as it says, is a review of our progress. And the highlights from that were that the DFE was presented with an improving picture of children's services, and that we know our strengths in areas that need focus. We've also had an Ofsted monitoring visit on the 28th and 29th of September, and that was published on the 2nd of November. And again, that's marked a return to Ofsted monitoring visits in preparation for a full re-inspection in the autumn of next year. And just to pull out some headline findings from that, again, Ofsted report that we're making some steady progress. They're confident that we're prioritising the key areas that we should be looking at over this next 12 months. And in terms of some of the highlights, social work is well supported, and we're more robust in our decision making. And we know some of our areas to improve are around our caseloads for social workers and variability of practice. So just a very, very whistle stop really of some of the key activities that have been happening on social care improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. That was a very good summary with the time that I gave you. Thank you. Right, questions. Who wants to? Councillor Burdes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm interested in because you mentioned quite a few things about we know about our strengths and the areas that need focus. Could you elaborate on the areas that need focus and how you're going to go forward with that? And then I've got another couple of questions after that. So, Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So the key area of improvement for us is really, as I say, around variability of practice. And there are a number of contextual factors that are contributing to variability of practice. So that is predominantly around our workforce, both at social work level and at management level. So we've had quite a lot of challenges around our workforce in terms of our retention, our recruitment of social workers. Many of those are national challenges in social work, but clearly if we want to deliver a solid improvement plan, we need a solid workforce behind us. So that variability in our workforce has contributed to some of the variability that we've seen in practice. Now, we have now established a workforce board. We have an updated workforce strategy. That workforce strategy focuses on 4 key work streams: recruitment, retention, which obviously we know is really, really important, health and well-being of our workforce, and also workforce development. So really making sure those workers are upskilled, confident, and really have the knowledge to do the job. So we have that established now. In terms of our management and leadership team, we're actually in a really strong position there. We're actually full in terms of our children's services managers, which I think is probably quite a first over the last couple of years. And actually, nearly all of those are local authority employees. I think we have 2 agency staff within that cohort of managers. So we're in a very strong position, but what we need to do now is start to develop and strengthen that management team. And again, particularly at our first line manager level. So again, that will help strengthen that variability in practice and make us really confident that our management teams are really clear on what good outcomes are for children and what good looks like for our children in Blackpool. Is that helpful?
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. It is. I'd like to move on to the Ofsted report, and you mentioned that we'll return to monitoring visits in October 22. So what is it? What areas do you feel you need to concentrate on there? What needs to be brought up to the standard they require or they're looking for? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So what happens with our monitoring visits is, in essence, what they do is they take a deep dive on a particular area of children's social care. So the visit that we've just had has been very focused on what we call early permanence. So that's really around our children that are on the edge of care. It's what happens when our children come into the care system, and it's looked at the impact of leaders and managers. So we're very clear what we need to do from this last monitoring visit. The focus of our next 2 monitoring visits is likely to be a look at what we call our front door. Now, again, that forms a very big part of our Getting to Good plan, which I know I haven't touched on in trying to whistle stop an overview, but you'll see it in the risk register. So we have a very strong plan in place for our front door. That looks at the quality of referrals. It looks at how we assess children. It looks at the support and the provision that we provide. So we've got a plan in there now, and it's likely that Ofsted will come back and review that plan as a further monitoring visit prior to a full re-inspection. We also have a plan around our children subject to child in need plans and children subject to child protection plans. And again, very likely that part of a further monitoring visit, there will be a focus on there. And again, we have a good plan in place there. And actually some of that work was touched upon within the last monitoring visit. So we know, for example, children that, as I say, are on the edge of care that are subject to child protection plans, we have much improved decision making now. The quality of our plans is much better, although still slightly inconsistent at times. So all of that activity, all of that complex work is within our Getting to Good plan. And that Getting to Good plan's monitored bi-monthly by our Getting to Good board, which is a partnership board. So we get a lot of sort of external scrutiny and challenge from our partners around that. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you. That's great. I think I've asked all I wanted to. If I haven't, is it all right if I come back later, Chair?
Of course it is, Councillor
So
Burdess.
thank you very much for that.
We'll never be mean to you. Okay, Jill or Stuart, is there anything that you wanted to come in with? Jill, do you want to go first?
Thank you, Chair. No, it was really good to hear that summary there, Victoria. So obviously a successful visit by Ofsted. And what I would say, again, because this information is in the public domain, just a bit more detail in the current position and a bit more detail in the outcomes, I think will be really helpful here, because it sounds a bit aspirational at the moment. And as this is an assurance committee, that's what we're looking for. So that was the comment I was going to make. I think it just needs a little bit more detail, and then it would reduce the sort of questions you're going to get at committee. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jill. Stuart?
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Galley. Thank you. Thank you, Vicky, for this report. Wonderful news, not least in terms of the developments there with the workforce and the management and leadership team, as you mentioned. My question relates to the final point that you raised there, Vicky, regarding the partnership board. To what extent is managing the risks that exist here, to what extent is it dependent on those partner organisations? Is there anything here that perhaps it is more under their control than we might otherwise like to be the case?
I'm not sure if I'm totally answering what you're asking here, but I'll try and come back to me if I'm not. So the Getting to Good board is just, you know, one part of a range of I guess, you know, critical challenge, pushback, scrutiny that we have on our improvement plan. So hopefully I've articulated this as well as I can. So, you know, that Getting to Good board, as I say, it's chaired actually independently. We do have an independent person that chairs it. I probably should have pointed that out. So they're independent. They're a person with a very extensive experience of children's social care improvement work. We obviously have our local authority employees, our chief executive attend. Those partners include the police, health colleagues, you know, quite a comprehensive range. Ofsted are actually invited to those meetings as well, and do receive the minutes from them. So I guess for me, that's just one part of a range of activities. You know, we know we've got Ofsted monitoring, but actually, and again, it's reflected in the risk register, we do meet monthly, on a monthly basis, with our DFE improvement partner as well. So again, on that monthly basis, we have that critical challenge in there. They meet very regularly with staff. Again, put that critical challenge in on our progress report. So there's quite a broad spectrum really around that critical challenge. Some is external, you know, some of it's from our partnership. Am I answering there what you want there? Is that?
Yeah, I think so, Vicky. Yeah, I suppose I might rephrase it if I may, Chair, just very quickly. Am I right in saying there is a forum here by which you can take issues and concerns to the partners, and the partners can do the same with Blackpool Council?
Absolutely. I'm probably giving you a complex answer there.
No,
yeah.
not at all. Not at all. Thank you. That certainly, Chair. Thank you. That gives me the assurance that I was looking for. I hope it offers some to the committee as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stuart. And thank you, Vicky, as well. I believe that's squared off 2A. Vicky, are you joining us or remaining for the rest of the meeting, or are you leaving us?
I'm not too sure if I'm needed.
Absolutely. I will leave the choice to yourself. Thank you for that, though, Vicky. That was really helpful. 2B, failure of service provider in high-risk contracted area for statutory services. This is on page 30. Now, broken this down into two parts. The first being waste and the second being procurement. John, do you want to just very quickly take us through the waste element, if you could?
Thank you, Councillor Galley. I've got some good news here in terms of this, because the Environment Bill has been delayed for quite a long period of time now. It's now been through both houses, and also Royal Assent yesterday. So it means the Department for Food and Rural Affairs can work with the Office for the Environment in terms of government service levels and KPIs to be monitored nationally, which will early next year hopefully cascade down to us in terms of the further development of a Lancashire and Blackpool strategy. Those will be really important to us in terms of those targets. As you know, there's been a delay in relation to this through the pandemic, and also in Brexit has influenced. Brexit not so much on a county basis, because we do still export a certain amount of plastic abroad, something like 12,000 tonnes, but it has nationally had an impact. So there's been a lot happening. It's now got to that point where we can move forward. An important thing about our new strategy is about landfill, and our contract ends in 2025 at Clifton Marsh, and we need a different solution for that. So in terms of actually the process we go through will involve scrutiny, as we have with most other strategies that we've been developing, because we think it's important that everybody has an input into this and an opportunity to contribute. In terms of the non-landfill solution, we had been thinking about incineration, which is refuse-derived fuel, in terms of electricity. And there are two companies who have actually got planning permission to build those facilities in Lancashire. We've not engaged in a procurement exercise in relation to that. We could have, but there's so much going on in terms of research and development at the moment. Although incineration is more climate friendly than landfill, we want to see what else emerges in the future, because so much effort, particularly in the private sector, is being put into this. So in terms of the new government strategy, that will be around food waste, separate collections, which will help recycling in terms of anaerobic digestion and turning food waste into energy. They're looking at fully deposit waste return schemes, obviously recycling, obviously the circular economy, keeping things in use for longer. There's many different elements to that, and also reducing waste horizons. And I do mention Envico in here, and you know, with Envico, we're working on an improvement plan, and what you will see through that is a lot more community engagement about how we can do better. Just a point in there about the number of people who leave pizzas in a pizza box, which obviously contaminates and has to be withdrawn at source. So it's quite positive in the sense that the Environment Bill's gone through, and we can now work in terms of putting together a process in relation to the development of a Lancashire and Blackpool strategy, similar to the process we did with the Lancashire and Blackpool flood risk strategy, Councillor Galley.
Thank you for that, John. That was excellent. We look forward to seeing that work its way through the scrutiny system. I believe Councillor Hunter wants to come in with a question.
Yes, it's just a very quick question, John. Are you confident, therefore, that we are actually up to the various legislative changes and challenges that are likely to come our way in the near future?
To be honest, Councillor Hunter, I'm very confident, because I believe collectively we've created the conditions to be able to improve services by joining domestic waste with cleansing and other environmental related services. It means that we've got an opportunity to be really focused in relation to this agenda. And I can see with the new Environment Bill, you know, some things that really we can drive forward really, really quickly as a result of transformational changes, as far as I'm concerned, in relation to services and how they're going to be operated and delivered.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Thank you, Councillor Hunter. We'll move on then to the procurement element of this report. Steve, are you leading on this response?
I am, yes, Councillor Galley. And although it's down as a risk management responsibility of the head of procurement, it's really every manager's responsibility across the council. A lot of people think that the procurement is the end of the matter. It's merely the start of commissioning goods and services. And whilst we have a large scope of training available, be it through iPool, various other face-to-face training sessions, codes of practice, we really do need to target this where it's needed, because contract management is varied across the council without a doubt. There's some examples of very good practice and there's some poor examples, and I think that was what was identified in last year's internal audit. Now, I know Mrs. Bagley, my head of procurement, is providing a training session to members on the 15th of December. That will capture not just contract management, also procurement and social value. But we will be looking to provide some external support and training, probably from social value from other sources, to a more targeted range of managers across the council, and prioritise it that way. But there is certainly room for improvement there.
Thank you, Steve. Go to questions on this, if we may. Councillor Critchley?
It's just one, but with two bits in it, Steve, thanks. Do you think we're achieving consistency, and are we getting the best value for money for what we purchase, and how do we measure that? Thanks, Steve.
Well, as I say, it is varied, and where we've got very good practice of regular contract meetings, relationship management, introduction of key performance indicators that are managed and monitored, which, as we discussed earlier on strategic leisure assets, yes, we can evidence value for money, but where that is absent, yeah, we don't know, and those are the areas that we need to improve upon.
As a follow-up to that, Steve, if I may, I understand what a challenge that must be, because you want the flexibility that allows you to allow each department to be dynamic in its own sphere and space, whilst trying to manage a process that works to all the correct guidelines and has the right processes in place. Is there a mechanism that we can create that would allow us to support yourself and the officers to create that paradoxical vision? Yeah. It's a challenge.
As a start, we have a contracts register. You know, we need to ensure that is 100% accurate, which I suspect it isn't, because procurement are not always involved in procurement or commissioning of goods and services. And an example of poor contract management is allowing a contract to lapse, and then before flagging up what you do from then on, and which is often why we are often asked to extend a contract, seek an exception from contract procedure rules, and that's just down to poor contract management and not flagging up the key milestones during the period of that contract. And yes, we can address things like that corporately, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and those are the areas that concern me as well.
Okay. And as a follow-up, and I was just trying to work out a way for how the audit committee can monitor this, and every credit to you for being so open about it. When this risk returns back to us in 12 months, will it look different? Will there be more mitigation in there that we could say, oh, there's progress, or is it something that you feel that we could create as a follow-up, a particular piece of work that allows you to address some of those concerns?
Well, I do hope this area will continue to feature on the audit plan each year, and the work that Tracy's team undertaking in sampling a number of contracts and seeing how they compare with benchmarks will hopefully demonstrate that positive trajectory.
Okay, thank you, Steve. We look forward to seeing progress being made on that. Do we have any further questions on procurement at all? I can't see any. No. Is it a good question? No, that's harsh. That's harsh. The only reason is it's 6:55 and this is a big item. Okay, thank you. Moving on to 2C. And this is a really tough one for us as an audit committee, and the reason it's tough is it's so complex, broken down into lots of different tiers. But this is the loss of key infrastructure and resource, which results in council services not being delivered. What we've decided to do as an audit committee is rather than call each officer out to just go through each of the different sections, is to identify areas that we thought were significant and wanted to address. So if, however, any of the officers feel that there's something that they feel we should know that we haven't covered or raised in this particular part, I want you to flag that up with us. But in the meantime, we'll work through the ones that we identified. So one of those in 2C was the ITC. This is on page 33. And Jill, I believe you had a question you wanted to cover.
Just a quick one, really. And I have to say, it's really good to see in this part of the risk register, in terms of the current position, some detailed information and to try and provide some assurance. But I would say that in terms of the outcomes there, it sounds like says there's no immediate issue in terms of sufficient funds in the reserve. But what about after that time? And what does immediate mean? Does it mean next month, next year? What level of time are we talking about there? And actually, the main question is: are there sufficient funds and are there sufficient resources for what the council needs there to be? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jill. Tony, this is a nice point to welcome you to tonight's meeting. If you want to also answer the question, provide a brief summary of the risk as well, that would be great.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Galley, and thanks for the question, Jill. I think this is particularly referring to the data centre and the resources required to make sure that the data centre that we've got is maintained to a high standard, and the technology that's in there is obviously fit for purpose for the future. So we have a reserve, an infrastructure reserve that is put to one side, and that normally comes from each year from the ICT revenue budget. If we have underspend, we always put it into that reserve to basically give us a cushion to start to refresh some of the technology, as it ages. And the reserve is healthy at the moment, and we are making investments at the moment. So, for example, we've just made a lot of investment in bringing the council's Wi-Fi in Bickerstaff up to date, and we've just replaced some firewalls, for example, in the data center, and we're always on the sort of looking at where is it we need to invest and where do we need to spend. So when I say there's no immediate risk, what I mean by that is that we've got a healthy reserve at the moment. We're in a good place for that. What I'm flagging up as potentially being a risk in the sort of medium term is if we don't have the finance at the end of the year that we've been able to put in previously to bolster that reserve, it will dwindle over time. So it's just I think the year upon year pressures that have come from austerity and savings that we have to make each year as a service is that that is starting to bite now, and whilst the ICT budget has been healthy to date, that potentially, if it carried on in the way that it had done in previous years, we wouldn't have that ability to keep investing in that reserve. So I don't see it as an immediate issue. It's just something I've flagged up to make sure that we certainly in the to inform Steve, in the sort of medium to long term, we need to make sure that we're
lost you, Tony, which is unfortunate. There is an
structure does stay.
Oh, you're there, Tony. You're back. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay, Tony. Don't worry. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that, Tony?
I don't think so. Hopefully, you got everything of what I said there.
We did. Yeah, we did. And I guess then the process is for managing that risk. And again, we appreciate you being so open about that as well. And again, it's something that we'll manage in terms of the risk register as another space or forum to review that risk. Do we have any other questions for Tony about ICT at all? Councillor Roberts?
Evening, Tony. Thanks very much for the update. Obviously, things have moved quite quickly over the last 18 months with remote working, and it's quite reassuring to hear that you've talked there about the infrastructure that's been updated and fast connections and newer hardware. What about your resource in your human resource in your department? How is that keeping up with the pace of change, and do you have sufficient resource to deliver things as we go forward? Are you holding on to people? What's the retention like?
Thanks, Councillor Roberts. We're fortunate in that we've had a very low turnover in ICT. We continue to have some really strong partnerships as well with particularly on the network and security side of things. So, touch wood, at the moment, we've got the capacity, to continue to deliver a high quality service. But it is obviously a concern that with the way the job market's going at the moment, that there's obviously, IT professionals are in high demand, and, there's a risk there, I guess, that, the private sector can, pay more than the public sector. That's something that we just got to, we're gonna have a pressure with potentially. But touch wood, at the moment, we're well placed, to continue doing what we're doing.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Councillor Roberts. Moving on to this is one for you, I believe, Steve. I don't know if Karen might want to answer it, actually. We've got a question from Councillor Mitchell on page 34.
Thank you very much. The reference to a new finance system to be implemented throughout the council. I don't know much about that. Could you give me a briefing, please, and what are the main advantages?
Karen, do you want to just explain what the financial system actually will look like and its benefit to us?
If that's okay, Chair.
Sorry, Steve, I was trying to promote your team again there.
Yeah, sorry. I'm the project director for both these two business critical system implementations, the HR and payroll and the financial management information system, and both of the previous contracts we'd had for 20 years with the provider, and as you're aware, we started the procurement process some 2 years ago for both. The implementations are at different stages, because the HR and payroll system is looking to go live with effect from April 2022. That will provide an integrated HR and payroll system for the council services, for many of its wholly owned companies, for a number of client local authorities, schools, academies, and other organisations. We're midway through that implementation. We had a meeting yesterday for an update on that. A couple of data loads already. Yes, we found errors and control failures and everything you would expect in any major system implementation, but you'd be naive to think that wouldn't happen. But we have a project plan in place, and as things currently stand, we are still expecting to go live in April 2022. The financial management information system, and that is with Technology One, is due to go live in April 2023. The same project management structure and governance is in place. We've got a further 12 months course to implement that, so that's very much backloaded with the emphasis on the HR and payroll system at the moment. But again, as you know, we invested, front-loaded the investment in terms of the procurement, which was a 3-stage process, which allowed us to have a good sight of what is available out there. And it's one of the few procurements where we've actually gone through that sort of third gateway process, and we discovered that the remaining candidates at that point really did sharpen their pencil. So we feel as though we're going to get very good value for money from both systems. And yeah, as I say, both business critical key systems for the council being implemented at a very difficult time. Ordinarily, we wouldn't do this at a time when we've got pressures of coming out of COVID, pressures of final accounts, budgetary pressures, but nonetheless, the procurement rules don't allow us to extend any further. So we have little option, and it was a great opportunity to, as I say, to see what was out there and procure new systems that are fit for purpose for 21st century local government finance, HR and payroll.
If I may, Chair, so it's a new financial management system rather than a new finance system.
Well, it's a fully integrated finance system that encompasses general ledger accounts, receivable accounts, payable, electronic invoicing, purchase order processing, collaborative planning, which is a budgeting module, the full range.
Okay, maybe you can just briefly assist me. I see the previous arrangements have reached the end of their shelf life, and this is a move to a new way of working. What will be better, clearer, easier to implement in future?
Well, in the modern world now, people can access systems virtually on mobile devices. It's very much real-time systems and say fit for purpose for modern-day local government services. There will be a lot of functionality that will be developed once the core systems have gone live in April. And we will use our systems development team to improve that functionality and efficiency.
So it's getting information more quickly, getting it at different locations. That seems to be the main advantage, as I understand
it.
There are numerous, but
I can see Tony's yellow hand has just appeared. So Tony, do you want to come in?
Well, one of the things I was just going to mention is that the new finance system is a cloud-based system, and one of the things about that is that we'll get updates much quicker, software updates much quicker than we would have previously got, and we won't have all the expensive time that and resources that's spent in doing software upgrades that we've had to do previously, and downtime that comes as a consequence of that. So I think that's going to be one of the major improvements in moving to a modern system.
Thank you. Yeah, the next one, team, that we were interested in raising tonight was around the head of, was it around the Envico merger with some of the council services? And obviously this has been well publicised and well promoted, and we've all seen that play itself out in services on the ground. I believe Councillor Mitchell, you had a question around this area as well. This is page 35.
Yes, I understand some of the apparent advantages of the new system. Would you say that there's less or more democratic control under the new system? As it's a separate company now, could it be the case that it might actually be more difficult for members and thereby the public to monitor the new system?
John, do you want to come in on that?
No, not as far as I'm concerned. It's a wholly owned company of this council that is funded by the council to deliver what we want it to deliver, reporting with a very robust governance structure through a board and the council shareholder panel. So I think it just creates the opportunity in, as I said before, we bring in resources, vehicles, people together in one place to be able to deliver what we want to see happen in Blackpool, and the improvements and the improved outcomes for local residents in relation to waste and general environmental operations.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell and John. I guess the wider point, John, is those are very front-facing elements of the council, and in the past, if there was a problem, they would have come before scrutiny. Now, those elements would be contained within a business which is owned by the council. So, in terms of the assurance that the committee is looking for, is that if there is a problem, that there's a mechanic in place that allows us to review those concerns, especially with them being so front-facing.
And I think in terms of that, I mentioned about the new strategy for waste for Lancashire and Blackpool scrutiny being part of that, but equally the improvement plan that we bring together would be something that would come to scrutiny as well.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, John. Thank you. Can't see any further questions on that. Moving on to, we sort of had a touch of this from Councillor Roberts earlier in terms of new ways of working and so on, which is also covered through the Head of Property Services, Head of ITC. Tony, you covered your element earlier. I believe Councillor Scott, you have a question on this area.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, with it being a hybrid type meeting, do we have the technology to support the new way of working in most meeting rooms?
Tony, I don't know if you want to come in on that.
Yeah, sure. We've been doing a lot of work, to be honest, with hybrid meeting room systems. So you'll appreciate the meeting we're having now is a good example of how we're able to host a hybrid type of meeting, and some of the learning, in fact, we've done through working with the council as we've been taking back into how we're going to do that back in the office. So we've got a number of hybrid meeting room systems that have been piloted at the moment, and we've got plans in place now to scale that up into a number of the council's meeting rooms. So there's there's good examples, like I say, with elected members at the moment where we're already doing hybrid meetings. The coroners, we've been supporting the coroner doing the hybrid inquests that the coroner's been doing, and we've got some social workers as well who've been doing hybrid meetings all the way through the pandemic. So I think we're in a really good place really to be able to scale that up, and some of the investment I mentioned earlier has been very much about making it easier for people to sort of move around the office, take their laptop into a corner and have a meeting. We're supplying everybody now with headsets. We've actually taken away telephone handsets and to encourage people to use the headsets to actually use things like Microsoft Teams, which facilitate that sort of hybrid approach.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Councillor Scott, for that. The only question or concern that I would raise, possibly, Tony, it's something in terms of, I'm sure you're aware, is just some of the confidential nature of those meetings, to make sure that the security is still retained and not compromised by the technology.
I'd absolutely agree with you, Councillor Galley, and that is something particularly if people are recording meetings, we're very careful about who gets access to the recording of the meeting.
Excellent, thank you, Tony, thank you. So I'm grateful to the officers there. I broke that down into a slightly unusual approach of working through that particular element of the risk register, mainly because it was so large and so detailed, but I thought it would allow us to concentrate on the key areas that the audit committee were focused on. I'm also aware, though, that it did mean I missed a couple of elements in there, so I don't know if any of the officers wanted to, any of the officers who we didn't question wanted to raise anything about their profiles, or are you comfortable with what's before us? No one's flagging anything up, so that's a good sign. Okay, brilliant, thank you. So moving on, the next part of the strategic risk register is 2D, cyber threats. In this element, I'm going to ask Tony if you could provide an update. I believe Councillor Roberts wants to lead on the response. But Tony, if I may, just to remind you that as a committee, we are allowed to sit in a private sitting, and confidential items are allowed to be discussed. So if you feel you want to raise anything with the committee that you wouldn't want to be finding itself in the public domain, if you could let us know, and we will instigate that process so you can speak confidentially to us.
Right, thanks, Councillor Galley. Hopefully that won't be necessary. So I think this threat is very much about acknowledging the threats that we face in the modern world, as we continue and increasingly use digital applications to go about our business. So it covers everything from making sure that we're training our employees, giving them the appropriate cyber skills to make them savvy users of the IT and not be caught out with some of the threats we're facing from, increasingly from phishing attacks and, fraudulent type attempts to con people through, the email system. It covers things like the defences and the technologies we put in place to try and prevent an attack, and really what we can do to be more proactive to detect and stop an attack. And also, accepting that no matter how good our defences are, nobody's 100% secure. And if we actually did face an attack, a successful attack, actually, how would we respond to that and plan for that in a sense, that one day, you're going to be successfully attacked, and actually, how do we then behave, to manage that sort of situation and that scenario. Hopefully, it won't happen, but we do have to plan for that scenario as well. So I think probably what I'd like to say at the moment is, whilst we've got no room for complacency, we're fighting a moving target here. Every organisation is vulnerable. But in May and June, we underwent a voluntary audit with the ICO that I think the audit committee has previously heard about, but an aspect of that was the information security. And we came out of that with a it was very thorough looking at our information security systems, and we came out of that with a high level of assurance. And just more recently, with the other sort of external assurance process we go through is something called the PSN, Code of Connection, where we have external assessors looking very closely at the security of our network and our security posture. And we've just been awarded our PSN certificate as well, which provides us with that assurance and provides some confidence for us to deal with other public sector organisations and government organisations in that, our network is deemed to be trusted by having that certificate. So I think that's probably all I've got to say at this point, Councillor Galley, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. Councillor Roberts?
Thanks, Councillor Galley. I have a number of questions, so I'll try and be brief and keep them short. What have we learned from other councils, including Hackney and Redcar, in this area? It's been quite widely publicised that their cyber attacks have cost their councils quite a lot of money.
Yeah. So in February 2020 and October 2020, I think it was Redcar and Cleveland and Hackney, in the October, both suffered very severe ransomware attacks. These were they took months to recover from, and the impact, I know Redcar was reported to have been in excess of over £10 million. So, this is something that we take very, very seriously, and obviously, for the grace of God, we're thankful that it's not been Blackpool. you know, we've been looking to learn what we can from these attacks. And I've probably got a couple of examples really of some of how we've been doing that. So in our refresher training that we now do, we ask people to do a cyber skills course when they join the council as employees. But what we also now ask people to do is once a year to actually go through some sort of refresher training. And our refresher training this year actually was very much focused on ransomware and what had happened at Redcar and Cleveland and at Hackney. So there was a short filming that showing our employees what can happen to an organisation when it suffers a ransomware attack. And what we also covered off in that was a lot of information about those two particular councils. And then we asked employees to carry out a phishing quiz, which is basically a series of questions, getting them to look at emails to help them identify which of them are potentially fraudulent type emails, because most ransomware attacks start really with an employee potentially clicking on a link and downloading a payload into the network, or going out to another website and sharing some information such as passwords, etc. So we've been, you know, really keen to learn what we can from Hackney and Redcar and Cleveland. And then another thing that I've been involved in my professional capacity with my professional body. I'm the regional chair for Soccer Team Northwest, and we had a ransomware special, and we actually had a guest speaker from Redcar and Cleveland, and some sort of Chatham House rules around that, really, to kind of give us the inside story of what had happened. And, you know, absolutely fascinating to understand what happened to them, and actually then what they did to try and recover from that. So yeah, been very keen to learn the lessons from those two attacks on those two local authorities.
Thanks very much, Tony. So just to follow up on one area you were talking about there, which was staff training within the council, yeah, and recurrent staff training. Yeah. Is that including members?
It hasn't. It does include members. It hasn't yet been pushed out to members, which is something that we do need to do.
You also talked about should the worst happen and contingency planning. Have we tested our contingency plans for a cyber attack, and how successful were they?
Yeah, we've done that on a couple of occasions, and the last time we actually also did it with some NHS colleagues. We've come out good so far, but like I say, there's no room for complacency, and I think one of the biggest things around doing the simulations is actually then also, it's not just about IT, it's really about the rest of the organisation as well, thinking through you know, how it would manage a situation if its IT systems were down for a period of time. So that's also a sort of big part of what we need to do in the simulation training, and I think there's more work we probably need to do to raise awareness with that. So some of my other colleagues, you know, are also thinking through, you know, what we might say, for example, say to the media, should we be hit by such an attack?
Thank you, Tony. I've only two more very quickly, just looking across at Paul. One is to do with, obviously, the move to cloud storage and data storage away from our council offices. And obviously we're using third parties for that. How resilient are them third parties?
Well, we obviously are using what I'd call best of breed suppliers in that space, and big cloud companies who've got far greater resources than we would ever have to sort of secure those infrastructures. We do take what is known in the industry as a zero touch approach. So we're basically nobody can get at that data without proving who they are through the sort of authentication process around that. And we do take a very active interest in actually where the logins are coming from. So, for example, most cyber attacks are likely to come from a foreign country. So we take a particular interest in where people are logging in from. So if we do see what looks like a suspicious login, we potentially quarantine user accounts and then validate whether it was a genuine access, etc. So there's things like that we're doing to protect the data that's in the cloud. And actually, believe it or not, we also then back up some of that data from one cloud to another cloud as well, to give us, if the worst did happen, we would still have a copy of the data.
Thanks, Tony. And my last question, it's very similar to one I asked a little bit earlier. In this area of cyber attacks and cyber protection, have we got the right level of expertise, and do you have enough resource in that area?
Yeah, so I'd always like to have more, particularly with this one. But what we've done in the last couple of years, we received some funding through the local government association, which has allowed us to actually train a couple of colleagues to actually get some cyber qualifications. So we've increased our sort of credentials and knowledge in that space, and thankfully those two people are still with us, having completed that training. And we've like I say, we've got a particularly strong relationship with a third-party network security company who is a massive help to us in terms of making sure we've got those sort of cutting edge cyber skills.
That's great. Thanks very much, Tony. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts, and thank you, Tony. That was an excellent summary of one of our higher risk areas. So brilliant. That concludes the strategic risk register item. Tony, you're free to go if you want to. If you want to stay with us, the choice is entirely yours. Okay. See you soon, Tony. Look forward to that brew. Okay, on to agenda item 5. This is one that we've obviously been looking forward to as well, the External Auditors Report. Now, in terms of our work tonight, committee members, what we're being asked to do is obviously approve the statement of accounts. Now, what we need to test tonight is that that's going to be subject to nothing being material or significant being identified by ourselves or others. So that's going to be our line of questioning to reassure ourselves around that particular area. But before we go to questions, Nicola, lovely to see you. And you kept your word. You always said November. So it's lovely to see this particular item here. So thank you for that. And I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. So as you've introduced, this is our audit update report for the 2021 financial statements. I'm joined this evening by Stuart Kenny. So Stuart is a senior manager from Deloitte, and he's taken over from Nick Rayner, who you may recall from previous audit committees. I think some of you have met Stuart in the audit chair's pre-brief. So obviously we brought our audit plan to the last meeting, and this is a report that's going to give you an update on the progress of the audit. So if I start with page 3, we start with an update, but before I update on 2021, I just wanted to flag where we were with 2019-20. So you'll recall that we sort of updated you that we were on the verge of signing that. We haven't managed to sign it as yet. We have had our representation letter back from the authority, so thank you very much for that. We do have a quality process that we go through where we have a partner who supports us, an independent partner who gives us challenge and signs off on our opinion before we do. And unfortunately, we've had some sickness, some sort of slightly longer term sickness. My colleague is now back at work this week though, so we're hoping to progress that this week or over the next few days. So just to give you a bit of an update on that before I sort of leap into 2021. So when it comes to the progress on 2021, we're happy with how the audit is progressing. I think it's gone reasonably well. we've just, Stuart's going to take you through each of the significant risks. We do have some areas outstanding, although not many. So Stuart will draw those out as he takes you through the significant risk areas. I just wanted to touch on the value for money section on page 3. So you'll recollect from our plan that the guidance has changed for 2021. So what we do now with value for money is we produce something called the Auditor's Annual Report, which is more of a narrative report on value for money. And the NAO's timeline on that was flexed due to the impact of the COVID pandemic on the audit. So we need to produce that report within 3 months of signing the financial statements. Now, when we sign our financial statements opinion, which we will do clearly in advance of issuing that report, we have to include within our opinion any significant weaknesses that we've identified in terms of the value for money arrangements. Now that terminology, significant weakness, is not our terminology, it's the terminology from the guidance. So what we flagged in the report is we have one significant weakness that we will be flagging in our audit opinion, and it's similar to the issue that we raised in the 1920 audit opinion, which came in the last report, which is to do with the Children's Services Ofsted rating. So one of the elements of the guidance around value for money is that we need to look at reports that have been issued by external bodies on the council, and clearly the Ofsted report is one of those. So we'll just be making reference in our opinion to the fact that there is an inadequate rating on the children's services. Now, having said that, we do clearly understand that that rating was given a number of years ago, and there has been a lot of progress made by the authority. So although we will reference that in our opinion, when we come to issue our Auditor's Annual Report, we will ensure that we give a narrative update on the status of that. So the fact that there have been a number of other visits and sort of inspection checks on progress since that point. And we did meet with Vicky and with Steve earlier in the week just to talk that through, so to make sure that we had all of the information that was the most up to date about the status of the children's services progress since the original issuing of that report. So I just thought it was helpful just to be upfront and explain that, and obviously if anybody has any questions about that, we'd be very happy to answer that at the end of the report. So I'll now hand you over to Stuart, who will just take you through the significant risk pages, which start on our page 7. I think it's your page 213. Thank you.
So as Nicola mentioned, I'll just take you through the next few pages. So the first significant risk that we've identified is in relation to the risk of fraud and revenue recognition. Now, this is a risk that we're required to consider on every single audit we do under auditing standards. However, it's important just to flag here that we've actually, we've refined the risk. So we've focused our particular risk around the recognition of grants with terms and conditions, and in particular, the new grants that you've received over the past year in relation to COVID-19. So on the page, we've just set out the procedures that we've performed. And in terms of the status of our work in this area, we have completed our substantive testing, and this particular risk is just going through our internal review procedures. So until that process is complete, we're unable to conclude fully on this. But just to flag to the committee, at the moment, we do not have any issues that we wish to bring to your attention in relation to that particular risk. If I could then ask you just to turn to the next page, so your page 214, we've set out our next significant risk, which is in relation to the completeness of accrued expenditure. Now, this risk really relates to management of the council potentially looking to improve their financial position by under-recording expenditure. And the way that we flag this risk is through management not posting correct accruals or accurate accruals. Again, we've set out on this page the procedures that we've performed. And again, this risk in terms of the work that's been completed is currently going through our internal quality review procedures. But we do actually have one finding that we would just like to draw to the attention of the committee, which is in relation to an over-accrual of 5.7 million, which is in relation to a historic housing benefits overpayment accrual. We've set out on pages 22 and 23 of our report this particular error in more detail, but we are aware that the council have actually amended for this particular error in the updated financial statements. If I could then ask you to turn to page 215, the next risk is in relation to the valuation of property assets. This is a risk that we draw out on a number of our clients, and it's really down to the fact that you have an exceptionally large property asset value on your balance sheet, and that particular valuation is subject to a number of key assumptions where if there was an issue in any of those assumptions, it could result in a material error in your financial statements. Again, we've just set out the procedures that we have performed, and just to flag at this particular point, we are currently still in discussions with officers around a few potential issues in the valuation of property assets. And so until we obviously receive any additional supporting evidence or resolve any of the issues that we potentially identified, then we will be unable to conclude on that particular risk. The next risk, the next significant risk, I should say, is then on page 216, and this is management override of controls. Again, this is a risk that we're required to consider on every single audit, and this is the risk that no matter how good the controls you have in place within an organization, there will always be somebody who is senior enough that they could actually override those controls and manipulate potentially the financial statements. Now, the main way that we view this risk actually occurring in any organization is through the posting of inappropriate journals. So that's where our testing focuses. We have completed the substantive journal procedures. Again, that is currently going through the review process, but at the moment we don't have any issues that we wish to flag to the committee. On pages 218, 219 and 220, we've then flagged some other areas of audit focus. Now, these are risks, to our audit opinion, that we don't believe necessarily meet the definition of a significant risk, but where due to potential assumptions in those areas or due to the judgments that are made by management, we do some additional procedures just to gain comfort. The first risk that we've identified is on page 218, and it relates to the LGPS pension valuation. So we've just stated there the procedures that we've performed, and we do have one issue just to flag to the committee, which is in relation to the upfront pension contribution that the council made back in April 2020. It was just when we were reviewing this, we identified a technical accounting adjustment in terms of where where the upfront payment needed to go in the accounts. We've discussed that with officers, we've agreed an approach, and that has now been amended in the updated accounts. On the next two pages, on 219 and 220, we've just highlighted the investment valuations and also the long-term debtor recovery risk. And this is really, these risks come about as a result of COVID-19. We have held discussions with management around these areas. We've received supporting working papers, and we've raised some additional queries around these particular areas, and we're just working through those at the moment. As it stands, we don't have anything to flag to the committee, but again, these are two areas that are actually still in progress. The final area I just wanted to flag is on pages 228 and 229, where we've just set out the audit adjustments that we've identified so far from the procedures that we've completed. We've included quite a bit of detail in this particular area, so I wasn't proposing to go through it in any great detail, but I'm happy to take any questions on that and any other questions in relation to the report.
Thank you, Stuart. I've heard very good things about you, and you haven't disappointed. So welcome to your first presentation to the Audit Committee. That was excellent, and you've answered quite a few of my questions already. Just before we go to committee questions, Steve, is there anything that you would like to respond with?
Yes, please. Thanks for the opportunity. Yes, it has been a much slicker process this year and a lot more pragmatic in the views of the audit team. As you know, 9% of audits were completed by the statutory deadline. We're now 6 weeks later. It sounds as though there's still a tad more work to complete, but we can see the finishing line. I think during the audit as well, there's some real added value provided by the audit team. That's probably over prudent provision we made around housing benefits was flagged up by the audit team, and that's to the benefit of the accounts. There's nothing within the body of Deloitte's report that I would disagree with. We will submit our management responses to the audit committee at the next meeting in January. There may be some alternative solutions, particularly around IT user access recommendations within that, but on the whole, yes, I've got no issue. I guess the final thing I would just like to clarify for audit committee members is the corrected misstatement of some £23.2 million. I wouldn't like audit committee members to think that we're technically incompetent within accountancy. This was a treatment that we actually incorporated 4 years ago when we did our first pension prepayment, and we were told by our auditors at the time that was incorrect and we should treat it through the reserves rather than as a prepayment, which we all thought it was. That was a previous audit firm. It's reassuring to know that the treatment that our colleagues undertook at the time was actually correct, and although this has been corrected in these accounts, it would have been 4 years ago if we'd have had our way. There was the threat of our accounts being qualified if we didn't comply with the auditors' views at the time. So all in all, I am very pleased.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. I smiled because I remember that meeting and how painful it was as well, and how far we've moved in 4 years. And this is probably the most positive statement of accounts item I can remember in at least 5 years, certainly since that particular meeting that was referenced with regards to the pension liabilities issue at the time. So great progress by all. Stuart, I've had quite a few of my questions answered. I know you and me were going to lead on this item. Is there anything that you wanted to come in with? Sorry, I should say independent, Stuart, not Stuart.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Councillor Gelly. Yeah, indeed. Lots of what I was going to ask has been addressed by Nicola, Stuart, and indeed by Steve's comments there. Certainly welcome the news that there's more, as Steve said, there's more of a pragmatic approach being applied here, and that relationships, shall we say, are working more smoothly than perhaps they have on occasions in the past. I'll ask just one question, if I may, Chair, and it's Steve and colleagues should not infer anything at all from this. I might add, it's something I'd ask of all external auditors at this point. But Nicola, in particular, did you get all of the information that you needed as quickly as you consider it might have been provided? Did at any point during the audit you have any reason to believe that things might have been being withheld from you for any reason, or that any management representations maybe weren't as fulsome as they might otherwise have been?
So there isn't anything that, all audits are a bit, some weeks are great and some weeks are a bit slower, and I'm sure that's the other way around as well. So there's been nothing that we would wish to raise with the committee. I have no concerns in that area that I would wish to raise with the committee. I'll just check with Stuart that he's Deloitte Stuart, not independent Stuart, that he wants to shake his head as well.
Yeah, no, I would agree, Nicola. I don't think there is anything.
And one thing I would add, independent Stuart, is that I have notice that we've implemented some daily calls with Karen and the finance team, and I think that's worked really well. So we have felt well supported. So I think we've tried to make some changes to the relationship and the interaction, and that seems to have gone really well. So we should say a big thank you to Karen, to Steve Mayer, and the rest of the finance team.
That's great. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Independent Stuart, for that. I'm really proud actually of where we currently are, and I'm hugely grateful to yourself, Nicola, and you, Deloitte, Stuart, and Steve, and the team. One of the challenges, or one of the targets that we set ourselves 12 months ago as an audit committee, was to be that arbiter in establishing a really good working relationship between our external auditor and the council's finance team, and I feel we've made great progress in that, and that's reflected in the comments we've heard tonight. But on a personal level, Nicola, I've often given you a tough time in some of these meetings, or certainly a challenging time, so I wanted to thank you for all of the hard work that you put into this and the progress that we've made, and just recognise that. So, committee members, we are being asked to approve the statement of accounts. Now, normally I would say subject to no material issues being found, but when materiality is around 11.2 million, I always find that too big a number. So what I would say is subject to Tracy and Steve being happy with the accounts being finalised, and if there are any concerns, that they recommend that it's brought back to us. Otherwise, that we are in a position to sign them off tonight, and we approve them. So if members are happy to approve, if you could. Brilliant. So I'm just checking what you can see on the stream monitor. So hopefully you saw all the hands go up there. So thank you for that, everyone. That's great progress. Very, very pleased and very proud of you all. So moving on to agenda item 6. Time for some work from our internal head of audit and risk. You've had a quiet night so far, Tracy, and that's probably a good sign. Normally I ask you to break this report into 2 halves, but I'm going to be really mean to you because of time. If you could give us an overall summary of the whole report, and then we'll go to questions.
So starting with the service delivery and actions delivered within the quarter, just to pull out a few highlights for you. So we are a bit behind in terms of delivering the internal audit plan, and also on the fraud prevention proactive work. That's predominantly due to other pressures and also some recruitment problems we've had within the quarter. Plans are in place. We are now managing to recruit to those posts, so hopefully we should recover in the remaining months of the year. We've been doing an awful lot of work around insurance procurement, particularly for Enveco Phase 2, which came to effect on the 1st of September, and also for the airport, for when the management arrangements transferred over to the company. So that's all concluded now, which is good. We also carried out an exercise of the council's emergency plan for flooding. This was an exercise with representations from the council and also some of our wholly owned companies, just to work through a number of scenarios to make sure that the plan would work in practice. As a result of that exercise, we are pulling together a report with recommendations based on the lessons learned, and we will factor that into future emergency plans, and we'll be working very closely with John Blackledge and the team to implement those going forward. In terms of the performance indicators, I'm not going to run through them all. Just a couple to point out. Risk register performance has been disappointing in the quarter. Whilst every service has a risk register in place, the response rate in terms of updating those was 64%. So we'll be engaging with those services who didn't respond over the coming months to try to improve that situation. But on a more positive note, fraud awareness training is increasing. We're now at 90% across the council. We're not quite at that 100% we aspire for, but we're certainly getting there. It's moving in the right direction. I'll move on to pages 244 through to 254 of your pack, which presents the outcome of the internal audit work completed within the quarter. Overall, for the majority of audits, we've been able to give positive assurance, whether that be adequate or good assurance, and that work's summarised within the report. However, unfortunately, there was 3 areas where we've had to give either inadequate or split assurance. So they're in relation to animal health outbreak planning, where we gave inadequate assurance. This was a piece of work that John Blackledge requested following the flu last year. And we identified that our plans were very out of date and needed to be updated to enable us to respond. So work's underway to address that. The delivery of the track maintenance programme, we gave split assurance. What we found is that the day-to-day management was good. Lots happens on that operational basis. But what was lacking was a more medium to long-term approach to the track maintenance plan. And again, actions are being taken to address that. And the final area of split assurance was managing investment portfolio, where overall we felt the controls were adequate. However, we were concerned about file management in terms of documentations relating to key investment decisions. We are not saying that proper due diligence didn't take place. It absolutely did. But when trying to revisit that as an independent person, file storage wasn't helpful to facilitate that detailed review. And the remainder of the report presents the usual management information around priority 1 recommendations, the use of covert surveillance and claims data. So that's a quick summary of the report, but I'm more than happy to take any questions.
You never let me down, Tracy. Great work. That was excellent. We're going to have, I believe, Jill and Councillor Critchley, possibly Councillor Scott, leading on our response on this. So, Jill, would you like to lead the way?
Thank you, Chair. Tracy, it's not really a question for you. It's probably a question for John, and it's about public health. So really disappointing to see that public health have not updated their risk registers for the quarter, and really disappointing is the inadequate assurance for the animal health outbreak planning, particularly because my understanding is that in the UK at the moment there is an alert on for avian flu. So could we just have some sort of understanding why it's in that position, public health? Is it the fact they haven't got enough resources? I know they've had obviously a very busy couple of years, but do they need those additional resources to get back up to strength? Thank you, Chair.
John, I believe you've just been promoted to public health there as well. From your many other jobs. No, it's okay, Jill. Don't worry. John does a lot of things, so it's easy to get confused as to why he's got that role as well.
Sorry. Oh, right. Sorry. I just saw the animal health, and I actually put that in public health. So sorry about that, John. My mistake.
It's okay. I mean, there is, in terms of animal health, there is a huge public health role, obviously, and a massive interface. In terms of the risk registers, I just think potentially it's the fact of how busy public health have been in their response to COVID that still continues as well. And I think that's potentially the reason why they haven't had that opportunity to update. But in terms of the animal outbreak, yeah, we did ask for this to take place because last November, I think as a council, we responded really, really well in terms of the outbreak between public health locally, our public protection, leisure and parks. What I did realise though is that there's been so many changes that a lot of the experience, expertise and knowledge that some people carried wasn't actually there in terms of some of the people we've now got in public protection and enforcement. And so now we're addressing that. We've got 5 members of staff on the training that was introduced 6 months ago nationally. There's 3 elements to that training. 3 of them have passed 2 of those elements, the last is a case study, and the other 2 start at the end of this month. So it's important that we get those people through that process. And that, in terms of that, a lot of that is around roles and responsibilities, key contacts, notifications, types of disease, cordoned areas, all PPE, all those sorts of things, but also in terms of a contingency plan that does need to be updated. And we're using and looking at the national frameworks that's in place for that. There is an alert at the moment, and obviously the national media that's gone out has been used locally in the media, and we've been doing a lot through social media around this to inform people of concerns around this, and also monitoring certain areas in Blackpool. And if there are any signs of avian flu, we will obviously move to the next stage of the process.
So, John, if I may, when will the committee get assurances about all those things that you're putting into place? Obviously, you reacted very quickly, and that's really good to hear. But will something come back to the committee on that?
Something will. I mean, our contingency plan, we will be running through scrutiny.
Right.
As I said earlier, and the same for our strategic asset management plan for tramway maintenance will be as well. And we found that really, really useful in terms of the support and input that we get through that process.
Thank you. So, Chair, if I just may go back then to my first question about have public health got enough resources? You know, given this very busy time period that they've just had, and I don't know who could answer that question, perhaps.
I'm going to bring the Chief, and he's been very good and very patient. Go for it, Chief.
You've just gone all quiet there, Chair. But in terms of the public health work, in terms of risk management updates, I think Tracy could probably confirm that public health are probably our best performers normally in terms of updating risk registers, business continuity plans, and being on top of all the essential training. So it's quite unusual for them to be an outlier in this way. So I think in terms of the risk about the lack of them being up to date, it's probably quite small. And I suspect by the next meeting, you'll find that they've got a zero in terms of not being updated. They'll be back to 100%. So it's purely a timing issue. And they've had a lot of work to do around particularly track and trace, where they're filling in for that. So I think it's purely a temporary issue and not one of resource in its totality, purely about pressures running up to the deadline. So if it's not in place by next meeting, I'd be very surprised. But we could update you then if that would suggest a resource issue if they're not up to date by the next quarter. But I'm 100% confident they will be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Jill. Great questions and good answers. I'll look at who's going to go next. Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Chair. On page 243, on the list of fraud risks, when will we see marketing campaigns to raise the profile of these risks?
This is for you, Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. The need to do some marketing and improve communications is on our fraud prevention charter. It's part of the action plan for this year. As I explained earlier on, we are behind on the proactive fraud work. That's one, down to resources. We've had some recruitment problems we've had to redress, which are now addressed, luckily. And also the fraud team have been heavily involved in the business support grant process for the lockdown payments due to the pandemic, which has seen a huge amount of resource in pre-assurance work and ongoing work in relation to post-assurance work. That said, now we are back up to establishment. I did have a meeting with the fraud team 2 weeks ago to look at some of the key actions we need to deliver, and comms is one. So we're starting on the internal information, and that work's underway at the moment. And then we'll be linking in with the communications team to look externally and what's appropriate to publish. So it's in hand, just not as far progressed as I would have liked at this stage.
Thanks for the update, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. We look forward to seeing progress on that front and testing that as well. Councillor Critchley, I believe you have a question for John. It is.
Is it for John, this?
Yes.
It's about the delivery of the track maintenance programme, John, and it's just about the governance arrangements. And will it include Lancashire County Council, and will it also incorporate future tram network extensions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the Tramway Governance Board is something that, you know, we've just put in place recently, as the report says. It includes the council, BTS and LCC. It is about the infrastructure and maintenance of the tramways. It will link, and already has linked to, the Office for Road and Rail, and also the Light Rail Safety and Standard Board. In terms of then the governance of that and where it reports, it will link to the shareholder plan or the BTS board and the cabinet member in Lancashire and Blackpool through to executive if necessary. In terms of its scope, we've widened it, as it says here, in terms of trams themselves, in terms of operating trams, and also the depot in terms of managing the depot, the building itself. When I say managing trams as well, that's coming into the frame because there is quite a bit come out from the Croydon Rail findings, and some of that is about safe systems of operations of a tram. So it will come under the governance of that group. In terms of the future and other tram lines, that will be dealt with in a different place, and the lead for that will be through Alan Cavell, Director of Regen. Because there's so much work, Councillor Critchley, in relation to maintenance and management, risk assessment and health and safety, and if you've seen the video that we've produced, you'll understand we were finding it really difficult to articulate the amount of work that goes into this, and that's why we produced that video.
Can we see a copy of that video? Can it be forwarded to us?
I believe it's been sent by Elaine.
Right, sorry about that. Thank you. And I will look out for it when I get home.
I would recommend watching the video. They've made a very dry subject quite exciting, which is some doing when it comes to engineering and track maintenance. So well done, John. We appreciate your efforts as ever. The only question I have, Tracy, was around the management of investment properties audit. Obviously, there was a priority one, and you've referenced that in the report, but we also noticed that there were 9 priority 2s. So rather than get you to explain that now, we feel, I don't know if the committee agrees, that it'd be worthy of us asking for the departmental manager to come in and explain progress at a suitable time in the future on those, if committee agrees. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, excellent.
For a future meeting.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tracy. Do we have any further questions for Tracy at all? No. Okay, thank you, Tracy. Another excellent report as ever. Thank you for your efforts. Moving on to next agenda, the agenda item 7, the action tracker. That's obviously for us to know. We're making quite good progress through that. I'm really pleased actually with some of the item progress that we are making. Agenda item 8, date of the next meeting. We're looking for around the 20th of January, if committee members are happy to agree. Agreed. Excellent. Okay, so it just remains for me to say a huge thank you. I've broken my cardinal rule by 2 minutes that we've gone over, the 2-hour rule, but I just want to say a huge thank you. We covered and squared off quite a lot of work tonight, so thank you for all the officers, all the independent members, our external auditors, and most of all the committee members, independent and elected. Great work by all, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.